All right. So I'm going to explain constructor overloading, or overloading a constructor. So basically, when you are writing a constructor, you're writing in potential input that the user could put in, right? So I'll give an example here. Let's say you are a incoming college student, okay? And you're entering in the student's information. Well, let's say I'm assigned with entering in this student's information into the system. And let's say that I don't know what their major is, but I know what their name is and their age is. So one thing I could do is I could write a class and I don't know, call it student. And I don't know why it automatically indents like that. All right, so we'll have a class called student, and I'm going to go ahead and write a few variables. So I'll say private string name. I'll say private int age, and then I'll also say private string their major. Okay. And then, so these are my instance variables. I'll just make a comment here. All right, these are my instance variables. And then here's a constructor, right? So remember we wrote public, and then from here we wrote what our constructor was. So if I said like public student, right? What was being passed in here? So first, let me do that. Add my curly braces here. So my constructor, say constructor number one. And let's say I know that the user is going to pass in a name, and then also passing in an age. Okay, so what I would do here is, in order to assign these as they come into the instance variables, I could say this dot name is assigned name, and this dot age is assigned age. Now, if that user didn't enter in their major, I'm going to assign just a value of undecided. Okay. And that will bring that in. Now, that might not make sense right this second, but let's say I also want to put in a second constructor. Let's say the user does know their major. Okay, this is an example of constructor overloading. So I am putting in multiple constructors into this class. So I'm still going to use student, but let's say they know their name. Well, of course they know their name. Of course they know their age. Let's say they also know their major. Okay. What this will allow me to do is this will allow me to assign this dot name is assigned name. This dot age is assigned age, and this dot major is assigned the major. Okay, whatever is entered in there. So now I have two different constructors that could be used in two different ways. So if I go down to my main method here, and let's say I want to create a new student, right? So I could say student, I'll just say S1 for student, is a new student. And what am I passing in here? I'm passing in, let's say it's a student that doesn't know their major, right? So I'll say um, James, and he's 18 years old, right? Let's say I added a second student, and and let's say they do know their major. So I'll say John, he's 19 years old, but he knows that his major is computer science. Now, overloading constructor. So if you didn't understand any of this leading up to right now, here's where I want you to pay attention, right? The computer always starts looking for the main method here. It runs and creates a new student, and it passes in two arguments. It looks up here inside the student class, looks at the constructor, and it sees that this is where I would enter this information in. I would not enter this into this constructor because this constructor calls for three different parameters that are passed in here, right? Well, three arguments are being passed in the second example. So I'll give you an example of S2. So John, 19, computer science gets sent into student. Okay, it looks for the constructor. John, 19, but wait, there's a third argument being passed in. There's not a third parameter here. So it's going to pass over that. So what this allows us to do is use one class to be able to accept multiple bits of information here. So both of these would run. So I don't know, let's say I want to also create, let's say I want to eventually get this information, right? So I could say public string, and I could say get, I'll call it get name. And public string, I'll say get name, return. My son in the other room talking. Hold on 1 second, Bubs. So I have return this dot name. This is my name getter. I'm going to copy this. Whoops. This is not Python. Copy this and add, right? This is my age getter. And this is going to be my major getter. This dot age, this dot major get major. Okay, so running all this, right? This would return int. Whoops. Okay, return string, name, age. Okay, so let's say I want to now, I'll say system.out.println. Let's say I want to get s1 dot get name. Let me run this and see what happens. It's running. Okay, print out James. If I then repeat this, right? And I say s1 dot get age, s1 dot get major. And if I copy all of this, and then go down here, I'll say s2 dot get name, s2 dot get age, s2 dot get major. So if I run it now, I should get James. I get James 18 undecided, John 19 computer science. So even though I only passed in two arguments here, it read it And notice that, hey, I'm going to go with this constructor, constructor number one, and not constructor number two because I only passed in two arguments. Okay. With that, with S2, we passed in three arguments. So it skips over constructor number one and goes to two. Now you can add as many constructors as you want, but that's where you're actually overloading there, meaning you're putting in multiple constructors. You don't need just one. Well, sometimes all you need is one, and that works perfectly fine, but you can add more than one to accept different numbers of arguments that are being passed in. But that's what it means to overload a constructor, or you might hear it called constructor overloading. So hopefully that helps.